It is Thursday, the 20th of April, 2017, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of scientific skepticism on Merseyside, around the UK and internationally. I'm your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So, Doctor Who was on?
I didn't watch it yet.
I spent the whole weekend basically watching the thick of it. Again, just rewatching the thick of it. So we've seen Peter Capaldi in a much better role.
It's near as damn it Doctor Who at this point, the thick of it. It's got Chris Addison in, he was in Doctor Who. It's got...
Was he in Doctor Who?
Yeah. It's in Doctor Who about 2 seasons ago.
I've never seen Doctor Who, this is why I'm not sure what you think.
But yeah, I watched Doctor Who and I really enjoyed Doctor Who. I was very excited by Doctor Who. It was fun, it was good.
There's a new assistant in it, right?
There is a new assistant. I was worried about the new assistant because in the mid-90s, early 90s, they had this spate of doing tomboyish characters. So you had Ace, and then you had Roz, and you had Benny, and these kind of tomboyish female companions in Doctor Who. As a kind of lazy way of writing strong female characters is just write them as men.
Write them as men, but change their gender. Yeah.
And I was worried when they announced, the new assistant's called Bill. I thought, they're not doing that lazy tom. Not that a tomboyish character is necessarily bad in itself, but
they've been lazy with it in the past.
If you're doing it as a way to do a lazy version of a female character because you don't know how to write women, then it's a bit, freaking hell, come on. But it doesn't seem to be the case. Despite the tomboyish name, Bill is not falling into that lazy trap that Doctor Who writers have done before. Bill's awesome. I'm very keen on Bill as an assistant. So yeah, I'm very excited because Doctor Who, I've not done any work for 3 days, and Doctor Who was on. So my life is basically
this has been a good weekend for you.
All fucking roses.
What have you done all weekend if you weren't working?
I played a bit of Zelda, which I'm enjoying a little bit more now.
You're enjoying it more now
after having persevered a bit.
You slagged it right off.
Yeah, we had feedback on that.
Your hot take has been outed.
And a bit of work on the QD website, which I'm quite,
is good. It is nice.
Quite happy with what we're doing with the QD website, ready for QD tickets going on sale. Which
May the 1st, we've not mentioned.
We've not mentioned .air, have we? So May the 1st is when QD tickets are going on sale. Priced £109, £75 if you're a student or if you're under 18. And that's going to be available from qdcon.org. So May the 1st, the day for your diary, May the 1st be with you. It doesn't work, does it?
Doesn't work.
I mean, neither does the fucking other one.
No, it doesn't.
So what have you guys been doing? Obviously not watching Doctor Who, either of you, which is a fucking disgrace.
I did not watch Doctor Who. That is true.
I failed to watch it. I didn't actually know it was on. I wasn't on Twitter. Normally Twitter tells me when Doctor Who's on.
What have we been up to? I went to London. I went to see Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead with Daniel Radcliffe in it.
I don't understand any of those words.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. It's a play by Tom Stoppard. And Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are two minor characters in Shakespeare's Hamlet.
Okay.
Who, at the very end of Hamlet, when everyone's kind of all dead in a pile, someone walks in and says, "My lord, we've heard news. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead." And you've seen them for half a scene about 3 acts ago. Well, not 3 acts ago, but half a scene a while ago. And then the next thing you find out they're just dead. So he wrote an entire play about those two dead guys, about how they got dead. So it's Hamlet from their perspective, and so Hamlet, the play, keeps wandering into their life and then fucking off again, and then the rest of the time they're kind of just meandering around, lost and confused. It's really funny.
Cloverfield 2.
It'd be like that, but I've not seen it. I don't think anyone's seen it, and it's probably nothing like it. But it's very good. And David Haig was in it.
I know David Haig.
The actor David Haig.
He was in Doctor Who.
He was in the thick of it as well.
Yes, he was.
He stole the show in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead as the leader of the troupe of tragedian players who were actors, a travelling actor group that specialised in doing tragedies. But by this point, they're so down at heels, they're basically prostitutes, arguing that they'll do on stage all the stuff that's meant to happen off stage. If you pay them a little bit more, they'll leave all those bits in, which is a kind of honesty apparently. But he was incredible in it. So yeah, it's a very, very funny play anyway. Daniel Radcliffe was very good. Went down to London for it at the Old Vic. Lovely old. That was like last weekend, not this weekend really.
Yeah, marvellous. That sounds.
And then this weekend we went to a wonky house, a wonky Tudor mansion.
A wonky Tudor mansion?
It was built in Tudor times.
And it's wonky?
It's wonky because it was built pretty much right.
Yes.
And then it was built on quite soft marshland. And so that's sunk in places. And so all the wood is kind of warped. It's massively wonky. Okay. It's amazing. You walk up and there are rooms that are distinctly uphill, significantly uphill. And you can see the walls and it's a straight line and a massive slope down and then a slope back up. And it's just the whole thing it's called Morton Hall. It's amazing. It's really great because because it's a proper like old school Tudor place with a little kind of courtyard out back. But when you walk around it, everything is wonky as fuck, and everything feels like...
There's a lot of houses like that in the village that I'm from, because most of the village is built on top of clay, and all the old buildings have sunk into the clay. So a load of the really old buildings, like the 1700s farmhouse, have got like this massive metal bracket around the building to hold the building together. And then the vicarage in the village is built on top of poplar tree roots, so that's crooked because the poplar tree roots are growing underneath.
Nice.
Lana's house is quite crooked as well, but I think that's not because it was built on soft ground or subsiding. No, just the builders were pissed.
Just badly built.
It was just badly built. There's not a fucking right angle in the place.
Well, in one of these rooms, I found myself very slightly out of breath at how unexpectedly uphill it was. I was like, I feel like I've done a lot of hard work here. I'm only walking up it. Honestly, it's if anybody ever has the chance to visit Morton Hall, it's a National Trust place. It's about a tenner to get in, unless you're National Trust members. But yeah, it's brilliant. It's really, really good fun.
Yeah. It's something I'd like to do at QED, actually.
A wonky house.
In one of the rooms, is build like a little wooden house on like 30-degree angle. So when you go inside, it's all kind of sensory, like fucked up. You feel it standing up, but you're leaning.
That would be interesting.
I've seen those done as a kind of art exhibit where you can go inside and it's kind of like, it feels mad in here because everything doesn't line up.
The Jewish museum, the bottom floor of the Jewish Museum in Berlin is a bit like that, because it's like 2 floors, but a sloping up and then a cross sloping the other direction.
Yeah.
So you're always kind of like disoriented about where you are. It's quite interesting architecturally.
Cool.
So I did that. I've also put my back out. This is an update. So in my backyard, there was this big planter filled with soil and crap. That used to have big bushes growing in it that would, like, during spring and summer, they would grow up and just, like, block the window entirely.
Okay.
And then they die over winter. And so, ugly as hell, we don't want to keep the fucking thing.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure cats shit in it sometimes. And,
Okay.
so there's not a nice kind of thing anyway. So I thought, right, get rid of that. So a couple of months ago, when it was all down and dead, pulled all of the actual big things out, and just got rid of them, went mental at it, but it's all fine. So that was all gone. So this weekend, I got rid of all the soil in it. So I was like, got a little shovel, and then shoveled them into big bags, and then bent the shovel because the shovel wasn't made for things. So I got a spade. I had a legit spade. And even though it's just a planter, I'm like spading it in. And it was like, I would say it was about 13 or 14 bags of soil.
Okay.
And then halfway through, it wasn't soil, it was massive pebbles, just a shitload of pebbles as drainage. So I'm now like shoveling loads of fucking pebbles into bin bags and trying to lift that. So I put my back out lifting all of them. But it did mean I could move the planter at the very end. And I found underneath the planter a rat. Was a rat. Hadn't been a rat for a long time.
Dead rat?
I think it was the source of the flies.
The origin of the flies.
I think it was the origin of the flies.
Indeed, the Lord of the Flies.
It was the Lord of the Flies, yeah. And it was kind of like, it had been dilapidated and consumed and gone to a point where it was just like a greasy stain where a rat used to be, but the till. So it was kind of in the shape of what was a rat. It wasn't very, very nice.
Oh, dear.
So what I think must have happened is something's laid a load of maggots in there. One of those little buggers has gotten in and then like germinated in my chimney or something like that and let a load of other fucking flies out.
A load of flies out, okay. Do we know what breed it was? It a Spragdorley rat? Was it
It didn't look cancerous,
No.
But it also didn't look much like a rat, so it was very hard to tell.
It could be an ob mouse, because they're quite fat.
Could be an ob mouse.
Are they greasy and entirely flat?
I mean, they're quite fat.
They're
They're
not
quite
totally...
they do look kind of flat because they're very wide and,
Are they?
and a little bit
This
squishy.
is why
Are
I
they a
always like
greasy
them,
smear,
because they're
though?
chubby.
Are they a greasy smear on a concrete floor?
No.
No,
Well, not
this one
usually.
definitely was. This one fully was. So I think that is the root of the flies. But I have at least got that planter up. But I did manage to put my back out, throwing the bags into a skip because I recognised they were only heavy enough. They were heavy enough that I could only lift them to around about my ankles comfortably, so I could move them through the house and kind of like get them just about in the car.
Yeah.
So I took Nicola to the skip with me and said, right, we'll need both of us on this bag to lift it up.
Yeah.
So I put it in my hands, and she proceeded to carry it with her hands on top of the bag. Providing extra weight to the bag, so I kind of like put my back out, lifting it by myself into there. Was that right?
Lifting Nicola's hands.
Yes,
Put
exactly.
Your back out, lifting Nicola's hands.
So I had to kind of explain to her what 2 people carrying something looks like. But after that was all fine. See, my back, it's kind of, I think it's all right. I think it was more a bit of that and a bit of the shoveling that's kind of made, because I don't do a lot of shoveling in my day-to-day life. And I think I probably uses some muscles that I don't often use shoveling.
Yeah, I damaged my knee. My knee doesn't work very well anymore.
Really?
Yeah, I was cuddling Adge. And it hurt my knee.
What?
What?
What did he have that?
We were at the pub the other day.
Yes.
And I was leaving, and so I gave a couple of people that I like a cuddle. So I said, I gave Alice a hug and said I'm going, and I gave Chrissy a hug and said I'm going. And Adge was like, hang on, what the fuck's going on?
Yep,
Mike's giving out hugs voluntarily. So I said, you can have a fucking hug if you like, Adge. So I gave Adge a hug. Then Chrissy wanted another hug, so I gave Chris. Then Adge piled on, and I twisted my knee. So I've been limping for a week.
You've been limping for a week because of knee injuries from hugging. This is why you don't touch people.
So I would recommend not hugging Adge because he gets violent with it.
Good to know.
If you could possibly avoid that.
What have you been up to, Alice?
I went down to Cornwall for a long weekend. In the nice weather. Turns out Cornwall's really pretty.
Yeah.
Really pretty. Lots and lots of water. Went to St Ives. I went down to see my grandfather because my grandfather has Alzheimer's
7
disease.
wives? Oh, no.
He's probably had almost 7 wives. He's a bit of a womanizer. But no, we went down to... He lives about as close to the bottom of the UK as you can get. He lives quite close to Land's End. So it was a bit of a torturous journey getting there. I left at 8 o'clock in the morning on the Friday and didn't get there till 8 o'clock at night in the evening.
Blimey. Because
the plane we were getting from Birmingham to Newquay decided to have a crack in the windscreen.
Oh, wow.
We were delayed for like 3 hours. So... I was
surprised that you're taking a plane, but it's not a surprise because
it's a really long way.
It's a surprise to take it from Birmingham. They do fly from Liverpool.
Like if you drive,
I was meeting my mum.
If you drive from Liverpool, like down to kind of Bristol-ish,
yeah,
you've then got as far to go again, effectively, to get all the way
down to Hale, which is where my granddad lives,
which is horrendous.
Yeah. So it's a really long journey. It would have taken just from Birmingham. It would have taken over 5 hours to drive in good traffic. As it happens, we got to Birmingham Airport 5 hours before we arrived at Newquay Airport, so we might as well have driven. But that was mainly because of the crack. I'm glad they fixed the crack in the windscreen. I'm not so glad that we were sat at the airport for several hours with no information. But we got there in the end and spent an entire weekend visiting my grandfather and trying to handle his Alzheimer's, which is getting quite bad now. But it was nice. He tried to show us around some of the places that he likes to visit. So my granddad, he's 82. He was 82 yesterday as the podcast goes out. He is still really fit. So he likes to do lots and lots of walking and he'll get on the buses and go around lots of towns. Now, we can't remember what the towns are called. So he's got a little book that he carries in his pocket, which has got a list of 7 towns that he likes to visit.
Okay.
So when we arrived, he was like, oh, there's somewhere I want to take you. Looked in his book, saw it was St Ives. I was like, great, I want to go to St Ives. So we were planning on going there. And then he looked out his window and he pointed at the hill in the distance and said, we should go up there first. What's up there, Grandad? No, it's nice. You'll like it. Oh, but you need to give us more than that. So we asked his girlfriend what he meant, and she said, he must mean Hell's Mouth Cafe. No, she just said Hell's Mouth. So we thought, well, we'll get in the car.
We'll go
and
up
drive
there.
into the Hell's Mouth.
It is the mouth of hell.
It is the mouth of hell. So we got in the car and we said, do you think you can direct us there? He says, I think so. So he started giving us directions on how to get to Hell's Mouth. We ended up in another little random village and he no longer recognised where we were, so he decided he was going to jump out of the car and start asking strangers how to get to the town with the church. We needed to get to a town with a church, and then it was on the other side of the town with the church.
Okay, so it's one of those towns that have got churches in them, as opposed to all those ones that don't.
There's lots of churches in Cornwall. So he's roaming around asking random strangers how to get to the place that he wants to get to, which was tricky, and we're trying to kind of navigate the situation as best we can when he's a very stubborn man and wouldn't listen to anything we said. Eventually he found a lovely couple who lived in the area, recognised what, because all the other people he was asking were tourists and didn't have a clue.
Another occupational hazard in Cornwall.
I've been in Cornwall, yeah.
So we found an old couple who knew roughly where he meant. They said, oh, we think you mean Gwithian. Followed the map on my phone to Gwithian, and when we got to Gwithian he said, aha, this is it.
Right.
And then gave us perfect directions from Gwithian to Hell's Mouth Cafe, which had the most incredible view I think I've ever seen over the cliffs and down into the water. It was really, really beautiful. It was worth it.
Could you not put Hell's Mouth Cafe into your phone?
I didn't know it was a cafe. I just knew Hell's Mouth.
Oh, okay.
And then we went to St Ives and had a walk around St Ives, which was lovely. We didn't meet a man with 7 wives there. It was very, very busy. Lots and lots of tourists in St Ives. Despite it being absolutely freezing, it was really sunny and really pretty, but it was freezing cold. But there were a lot of people in the sea, on the beach, swimming. Like, not even just surfers, like kids swimming on the beach in freezing weather. We went to lots of other little beaches and there were lots of people surfing, but I can more understand that because at least they're wearing wetsuits. We met a surfing dog.
Was the dog in a wetsuit?
It wasn't. On our last day there, we went to Watergate Bay, which is really beautiful, very picturesque and near the airport. And we were looking in one of the shops there and a little dog wandered past. And I was obviously interested in the dog because I like dogs. And when I was chatting to the guy behind the counter, he was like, oh, yeah, that's the dog on all of these little... what the fuck's the word? Magnets that have got drawings of a dog on a surfboard or a photo of a dog on a surfboard. It was the same dog.
Surfing dog.
Okay, so, you met a famous dog.
A little famous surfing dog. So it was a great weekend overall.
Excellent.
This week, I thought I'd give a bit of an update on a couple of homeopathy stories, because apparently we don't do enough updates on stuff on this show, so I thought we'd break that tradition.
So we've done back updates now, we've done flies updates.
We've done flies updates, we've done back updates, we're doing updates left, right and centre, so this one is a homeopathy update. Some listeners in the UK in particular might have noticed the announcement at the end of last month that NHS England are going to stop certain products being prescribed on the NHS, specifically products that are deemed low clinical value. This was kind of big news. I'm sure you guys saw it as well. Gained widespread coverage. Pretty much every national newspaper gave lengthy reports of this announcement from NHS England. And the BBC's flagship radio news programme, Radio 4's Today programme, featured the story very prominently. And I'll come back to that one in a moment. So this whole story was about a list of low clinical priority items that were being announced. This list was being announced as a proposal to save £400 million on NHS prescriptions by identifying products which were deemed not worth spending money on and essentially banning those. And the top 10 of those products were listed in this announcement. And they included gluten-free food, which apparently we spend £21.9 million a year on in terms of NHS prescriptions on gluten-free food.
Well, the interesting thing about gluten-free food, aside from the gluten-free kind of pseudoscience health fad thing, obviously you've got people with celiac disease who have genuine gluten
we once did a
intolerance.
piece on the show and you failed to record it.
Might have done.
Oh, really?
That might have happened. So it was the show.
That was the episode where you didn't record my
voice. The show
voice.
that we didn't put out because we didn't record Alice's voice.
Yes. There you go.
We re-recorded.
So we have talked about it.
Although it's long enough ago now that we've forgotten, we could probably just reuse the piece.
The story,
we could do, that's true.
If I can find it.
But the choice in supermarket, because of the pseudoscience fad, the choice in supermarkets for gluten-free stuff
is
now
increasing.
Yeah, that's the irony of it. Yeah,
huge. There's often like an entire gluten-free aisles in your regular mainstream supermarkets,
and also going to restaurants is a lot easier. There's a lot more restaurants that do gluten-free or know what gluten-free is, because the number of restaurants will say, "Oh yeah, we do gluten-free stuff," and then give you sauce that's got flour in it to thicken it.
Yeah.
It's problematic in some senses as well, I agree.
But that's the irony is that I think when we would have been giving out gluten-free food initially on the NHS, when that kind of thing would have been coming in, I'm not quite sure the genesis of it, but you'd imagine it was at a time when there wasn't this big explosion of gluten-free food. And that explosion of availability is probably down to the pseudoscientific gluten sensitivity in diet. So there's been a useful kind of corollary to that, a useful kind of side effect of that pseudoscientific explosion. And it means that the prices of actually being able to afford gluten-free food have come down significantly to a point where we no longer need to prescribe it on the NHS.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, except for people on the breadline who might be struggling to afford even that extra little bit of added expense. But I mean, funnily enough, I was in a meeting of Wirral CCG last year where they talked about whether they'd carry on funding gluten-free food on the NHS and decided not to. And there was actually some people there who were saying, look, I can't afford even the little bit extra a week that it would cost for me to be able to buy gluten-free foods. But I guess that's the hard decision you make when you're an administrator that's trying to help run a system of healthcare that has to cater to everybody as fairly as possible, really. So yeah, gluten-free food is on the list of stuff to go, £22 million a year. Other stuff on this list include uncommon travel vaccines, so vaccines for things like yellow fever, meningitis, TB, hepatitis B, encephalitis, things that aren't your bog standard ones.
Okay.
At the moment, those cost about £50 a pop if you're going to certain specific countries where they only let you in if you've had one. We spend about £31.3 million a year on that. There's called Praximol painkillers, about £8 million a year. Omega-3 fish oil pills at £5.6 million a year. Doxazocin. Damn it, I did actually practice that. Doxazocin, there we go. Which is another drug. Fentanyl, doxazocin is £7.1 million a year. Fentanyl is £10.1 million a year. Rubefacient are £6.4 million a year. Liothyronine is £30.9 million a year. Tadalafil is £10.5 million a year. And lidocaine plasters, which are large plasters that have an anaesthetic involved in them, we spend about £17.6 million a year in there. So actually, of this list of 10 things, a lot of them are actually drugs.
Yeah.
And the drugs that are on there are largely on the low clinical priority list because they might only be effective for certain segments of a population. So I think there was a painkiller in there that's only useful for X number of people and the rest of people aren't going to get a benefit.
Sure.
Or it's stuff that's available over the counter, or it's stuff that it's just not deemed to have a high enough benefit.
Well, I guess you can get different versions of it, like the lidocaine plasters, you can get topical lidocaine.
Yeah, exactly. And what they were saying is that even those plasters are available over the counter, so it's actually kind of worthwhile. And this kind of harkens back to a conversation we've had previously, which I'll kind of come to. So there's lots of reasons why they would all be banned, but not all of them are banned because they are completely ineffective. In fact, I don't think anything on that list, maybe omega-3 fish oil, I think there's not very good evidence for. But when I talked about being at that meeting in the Wirral about whether to continue funding gluten-free food, coincidentally, that was also the same meeting in which homeopathy was scrapped from local NHS. That's why it was there. They were talking about which procedures of low clinical excellence or low clinical evidence would they continue funding, and they talked about gluten-free, and then they talked about homeopathy. And that's extra coincidental because when the Telegraph, amongst all the coverage this story got, when the Telegraph covered this list of 10 banned prescriptions, they highlighted what they thought was a clear omission from this list in the sense of homeopathy. Their story read, homeopathic medicines to escape NHS prescribing ban. That was their headline on the 20th of March. And they went on to quote Chief Medical Officer Sally Davies in highlighting that homeopathy was rubbish and a waste of money, as she'd said. The article also quoted Sandra Gidley, who is the chairwoman of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, chairperson. The Telegraph said chairperson of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, who said, "We are surprised that homeopathy, which has no scientific evidence of effectiveness, is not on the list for review. We're in agreement with NHS England that products with no or low clinical evidence of effectiveness should be reviewed with urgency." And the Telegraph also explained that it's estimated that the NHS spends £4 million a year on homeopathic treatments, and they got those figures from me. That was my work from Good Thinking. So we have this situation where the Telegraph, uniquely amongst the newspapers to cover this, spotted that homeopathy wasn't on that list of 10. And started sort of berating people for that.
Has the list of 10 always been marketed as this is the complete list? Because it seems
we'll come to that.
A peculiar thing to be like, why is that not on the list of partial things that you haven't given a complete list for?
Exactly. Well, we will come to that. We'll come to that kind of aspect of it. But what I will say is it wasn't just the Telegraph that reported on the omission of homeopathy from the list. Now, on April the 3rd, a couple of days later, the magazine What Doctors Don't Tell You reported on the story thus: homeopathy escapes NHS cuts. Despite a relentless campaign by doctors, medical regulators and internet trolls, homeopathic remedies will continue to be made available on the UK's NHS. The remedies, which cost the NHS around £4 million a year, have escaped the latest round of cost cutting, which has removed heartburn pills, paracetamol, sun cream, omega-3 fish oils, travel vaccines and gluten-free food from the list that can be prescribed to patients.
Okay, so who's campaigning against homeopathy there on that list?
Doctors, medical regulators and internet trolls.
And which of those three are you a doctor?
I'm not.
Are you a medical regulator?
I'm not.
I think that makes you.
I think that makes me an internet troll in the eyes of What Doctors Don't Tell You.
I think it does, Marsh.
So, reading this, victory to the homeopaths, right? Not quite. But before I explain why not, allow me another digression. Allow me digression to another homeopathy report in the same publication, What Doctors Don't Tell You. On April 10th, they reported, Ombudsman investigates flawed homeopathic study that claimed it doesn't work. A major and influential review of homeopathy concluded that the controversial therapy doesn't work, but it was so riddled with error, says What Doctors Don't Tell You, and bad science that it sparked an official ombudsman investigation. The world's media announced that homeopathy was a scam after the Australia government's National Health and Medical Research Council, the NHMRC, published its findings in 2015 that there are no health conditions for which there is reliable evidence that homeopathy is effective. But now the Commonwealth Ombudsman is investigating the review's procedures after receiving reports of inaccuracies, mishandling of evidence and conflicts of interest.
Blimey.
You remember the NHMRC report,
I remember,
I'm sure.
yeah.
It was like the most comprehensive evaluation of the evidence for and against homeopathy to date. Very welcome report for those who recognise legitimate science. So to hear that it's being investigated for inaccuracies gave me cause for concern. My concern was slightly lessened when I heard the source of the complaints that were made about it, as What Doctors Don't Tell You continue. The review has been triggered by the Australian Homeopathic Association, supported by the Homeopathic Research Institute, which began questioning the review's process after several solid studies that demonstrated homeopathy's benefits had been overlooked. And the AHA has discovered that Professor Peter Brooks, the chair of the NHMRC committee that carried out the homeopathy review, never declared that he was a member of the anti-homeopathy lobby group, Friends of Science in Medicine. Still, even with that bias in the complaint-making aside, an investigation by an ombudsman would doubtlessly be something that homeopaths the world over would crow about and use to denounce this whole report as being discredited. So I figured it was kind of worth understanding what was going on here and what is this investigation that's going on, what are these complaints, what are these supposed inaccuracies and mishandling of evidence and things like that. And so I got in touch with our friends and colleagues in Australia, Iran Segev and Tim Mendham from the Aussie Skeptics, to ask them to see if they could find out what was going on.
Sure.
And so they dug around a little bit and made a few calls to the relevant ombudsman, the one that was quoted, and neither Iran nor Tim were able to find any indication that there was an ongoing review of the NHMRC. Neither had any evidence that there was an investigation happening, and in fact they were told over the phone, there is no such investigation, we are not looking into this.
Okay.
So is this complaint real? Is there really an investigation that the ombudsman are apparently actively covering up? One of the things they actually found out as well is that the cited ombudsman, the Commonwealth Ombudsman, wouldn't even be the right ombudsman to complain to. Yeah. Apparently, it would be a different ombudsman. I think that's what Tim told me. So is there really an investigation that they are actively covering up, or were What Doctors Don't Tell You, the Australian Homeopathic Association and the Homeopathic Institute wrong in claiming this victory?
I mean, that would be a shock for some homeopaths to be wrong.
It would. I mean, time will tell exactly what's going on here, whether they've made this up, whether they're mistaken, deluded, confused, whatever variation of wrong that this might be. But I know where my money is, and until I see some evidence of any investigation happening, I think they're jumping the gun on that. Anyway, that digression aside, back to the NHS homeopathy story. So was homeopathy really omitted from this list? I've got to say, when I first saw this story everywhere, I assumed it had been omitted. I thought it was pretty odd because you'll remember 2015, Good Thinking threatened to bring a judicial review against the Department of Health unless they added homeopathy to just such a list. So it seemed pretty strange that they'd do this list and not put a homeopathy on there. It's worth pointing out that this is still something we're pushing. The 2015 thing, that hasn't gone away. We haven't forgotten about it. And just because we haven't spoken aloud about it doesn't mean that the wheels have stopped turning. We've been having conversations even as recently as last week about this with the Department of Health. I promise this won't be one of the things we neglect to ever mention again. There will be updates on this. Bear with us. Keep supporting Good Thinking. Stuff is happening. So I was pretty puzzled initially as to why homeopathy wasn't on this list of banned stuff. So I had another look at the story and I realised what's happened here. The story was an announcement of a programme to make £400 million a year savings on the NHS by stopping prescriptions for items of low clinical effectiveness or low priority. Homeopathy is pretty much universally considered by the NHS to be in that category. If you look around the different CCGs, that's their policy on homeopathy, is a policy on procedures of low clinical excellence. So it's clearly in that category. Why wasn't homeopathy mentioned? Well, first of all, we don't actually spend that much on homeopathy prescriptions.
Yeah, if we're looking at like kind of 4 million and these are like 27 million savings, it's like when you go for the low-hanging fruit first, the stuff that's going to save you a lot of money.
Well, ironically, not the low-hanging fruit. You go for the biggest fruit first. Take out the biggest, juiciest fruit first.
You go for the heaviest fruit.
Exactly. Yeah. And also bear in mind that this is about prescriptions. So NHS England has a figure somewhere around the region of £100,000 for homeopathy prescriptions. That's the actual sugar pills themselves. Yeah. It's what the GPs give out, which is about £55,000 a year, something like that. And it's what's administered at the homeopathy services in London, Glasgow and Bristol. hospitals. So they've kind of totaled that together. And I think they said somewhere between 100 and 150 grand a year.
Okay.
The rest of that £4 million is spent on running the service, paying for consultations and facilities and staff and all that kind of stuff. So in their figures, homeopathy was listed as 130 to 150,000 pounds, something like that. So if you're going to start saving 400 million, you're going to go for the 10 biggest spends and work down from there, surely.
Sure.
In fact, when I looked around the story, it was pretty clear this project will include homeopathy. A point that was confirmed on Twitter by Julie Wood, who's the chief exec of NHS Clinical Commissioners, which is the body that runs CCGs, essentially. That's what all the CCGs kind of report into. She said on Twitter, in response to Sarah Woollerson MP's question about homeopathy, she said homeopathy is in the overall £400 million of spend identified. It's currently not in the first wave of 10 products for review, but this is an active project.
Okay, so the 10 they announced was just the first batch, essentially.
Yeah. And if you think some of these were 30 million here and 20 million there, if they had the figure at 130 grand, then obviously it wouldn't make it the first 10. Still, that explains it a bit, but you might still wonder why homeopathy is omitted even from the first 10 when it is such a slam dunk win to end the funding for it. Because if you look at what's in that 10, lots of them are actually effective to some degree. Gluten-free food is useful to people with celiac disease.
Yes.
The travel vaccinations are useful to people travelling to those countries. So there is some justification that there might be a reason to spend the money in those areas. There's no justification for homeopathy. Why would they keep a small by comparison spending on homeopathy in place while restricting things that actually work? I think part of the answer might be they didn't realise that support for homeopathy is much less strong than it used to be. Because if you're looking to scrap homeopathy, and we're still in this place previously where the media sees that as a cut rather than a saving, and homeopathy lobby groups whip up frenzy in a small section of the public to create a headache for anybody trying to remove homeopathy.
Sure.
Ending that spend might be a lot of hassle for not a lot of saving. But if the media and the public, by and large, now recognise that homeopathy is bunk, you're pushing downhill at an open door. So where are we right now? Well, a good barometer for where we are right now is I mentioned that the story got coverage on BBC Radio 4's Today programme.
Yeah.
So appearing on that show was Simon Stevens, the chief exec of NHS England, and he was grilled for 20 minutes or so about this list, what it means to end the prescription of these things, what implication it might have for people who get these products currently. And then the presenter asked him about the £4 million the country spends on homeopathy, out of the blue. It wasn't in the initial announcement. I don't think that this wasn't spurred by an item in the press release. As best I can tell, it wasn't from a lobby group responding to the announcement and counter-briefing or anything like that. As best I can see, this came up because homeopathy is now correctly seen as so ineffective that the media will not only not give it a pass, but they will notice its omission from a list of ineffective or low clinical priority items.
Sure.
There's several good reasons why this is the case, but some of those reasons, for certain, are the work that I've been doing with good thinking to keep homeopathy on the agenda and in the media. I know that for certain because it's my numbers that they quoted. They're talking about the numbers that we've published over the years. Caught a little by surprise by this, Simon Stevens on the show, who wasn't expecting to talk homeopathy because it's not in the list.
Yes.
It's not in the press release. He explained that if we are spending £4 million a year on homeopathy on the NHS, that is clearly absurd, he said, direct quote, because homeopathy is nothing more than a placebo. He also said, direct quote, homeopathy was a classic example of those sorts of things that we want to see less of. Effectively, he highlighted that homeopathy is exactly the type of wastage that this entire project is designed to find and eliminate. This is huge. So huge, in fact, that his comments kicked off another round of media headlines, including the Daily Mail's coverage, which was titled, "Prescribing homeopathy is absurd and the £4 million spent on the controversial treatment each year should be cut, NHS boss claims." And then being the Daily Mail had 4 little bullet points there. Simon Stevens announced a plan to save the NHS £1 billion over the next 2 years. The chief exec of NHS England said it will have to cut back on some drugs, but it will still spend upwards of £4 million each year on homeopathic medicines. He said the NHS shouldn't use any of its budget on the controversial treatment. And to nicely tip the hat to their source even further, the Daily Mail wrote, "Despite the Department of Health not keeping track of how much it spends on the practice, a charity previously reported it being in excess of £5 million. Towards the end of 2015, Good Thinking charity, close enough, estimated it was enough to pay the salary of 239 nurses," which we did. That's from our work. That's directly from our work. So that's kind of lovely. I think this is really interesting here. First of all, where does this leave us? Well, NHS England now realise that the tide has turned on homeopathy in terms of the public sentiment, and that's a very good thing. Now they know they're not facing an uphill struggle, they might find that pushing homeopathy up their to-do list is worthwhile, especially now that they're very much aware of how much money is being spent on homeopathy, that it's £4 million and not just £100,000 or so that they had in their figures, and how powerful a saving it could be for maybe not that much work.
Yeah, but you do have to put up with angry emails from John Cook.
You do have to put up with the angry emails from John Cook.
I mean, they will be swamped by emails from John Cook recommending that the entire of NHS England is run by
Great Yarmouth
CCG.
That is true. But on the flip side, bear in mind, we still have our ongoing conversation and legal conversation with the Department of Health around blacklisting homeopathy. So if they don't blacklist homeopathy, not only are they not fulfilling in their obligation to have a consultation about doing that, but having delayed us for 2 years, having made a promise to have that consultation, that weakens their argument rather than strengthens it.
Sure.
So they might be in a position where if NHS England also put some pressure on homeopathy, which it looks like they might be doing, that's going to help grease the wheels for that decision to go through too. I mean, I don't know, but it could be possible. Certainly, I think the coverage is going to have helped there. If NHS England starts scrutinising and making plans for including homeopathy in their first round of things to ban, we could be both pushing in the same direction at the same time. On top of that, the added scrutiny and spotlight means homeopathy could come under pressure in the 3 remaining CCGs to fund it in the southwest of England, and our calls to get greater transparency on homeopathy spending in London might be given a boost too. And this kind of come about because I think people have misunderstood that homeopathy was already on that list. They've thought, well, this is the first 10, this is the only stuff that's going to be in there. They haven't fully kind of noticed that the thing is that when I read it, I thought, well, obviously homeopathy's in there. Yeah. But the slight misunderstanding of that and the fact that the landscape now in terms of how homeopathy is considered is that narrative, that dialogue has been changed so significantly to a point where the media recognise that homeopathy is bullshit. The public now recognise homeopathy is bullshit. We've just had Homeopathy Awareness Week, and we've probably had more jokes than ever about how shit homeopathy was.
Sure.
That's been mounting each year. I think that tide of public opinion turning has driven this further, and I think this is going to have a big impact on what NHS England do from here. The inadvertent shift of this story's focus to include homeopathy could have huge, important consequences for the work of Skeptics and for what we're doing with good thinking. It was a very good day for skepticism.
So we've all heard about megadosing using vitamin C to treat cancer as spouted by plenty of pseudoscientists and, in fact, actual scientists. Most famously, the Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling, who, despite being a chemist and not a biologist, was quite determined that vitamin C is some sort of wonder cure for colds and cancer and a whole range of other diseases. It must be true. He's published it in books.
Heavy wallet syndrome. It's a great cure for heavy wallet syndrome.
Yeah.
Books, so much more legitimate than proper peer-reviewed journals. Actually, he did publish some actual papers as well, but there are published reviews, published reports contradicting his claim too, neither of which I'm going to go into now. Safe to say, I think we all know that not all academic papers were created equal. These days, plenty of pseudoscientists fawn over this apparent wonder cure that no one has been able to prove effective, despite plenty of people using it to treat their cancer. And plenty recommend that patients eschew chemotherapy in order to take vitamin C.
What? That's terrifying.
Yeah. Well, we've seen even you get those kind of charity fundraisers. Let's all club together to help Johnny cure his cancer. And I've seen plenty of those that are for vitamin C. As have you, I
for
think.
vitamin C and against chemotherapy. Yeah. Chemotherapy didn't work. Chemotherapy is horrible. It's toxic.
It's drugs. It's poison. It's big pharma. Evil. Yuck.
I mean, it is drugs and it is toxic and it is horrible, but it works.
Yeah, that's why it works.
That's why it works. Yeah,
that is what it's meant to be. Yeah.
But what if actually vitamin C is able to help treat cancer? So last month, an article in The Express had the headline, "High doses of vitamin C can help fight cancer by attacking tumours, says new study."
Alice, you're not going full woo on us here, right?
For some reason, vitamin C and cancer are in all caps, which I don't understand. Under that, they had a subheading which read, "Vitamin C could help cure cancer." This time, vitamins in caps and cancer isn't.
I mean, the C part of vitamin C should always be in caps.
Obviously, yes.
Good.
Yes. Vitamin C could help cure cancer. Doses up to 1,000 times higher than usual target tumour cells, a study found. The article begins, "The tumours are then made easier to treat using radiation or chemotherapy," which is a really weird way to start an article.
That is weird. So that's the opening. That's got to be following on from what was meant to be the opening. Yeah.
I think they've got heading, subheading, first sentence, which is following on from the subheading. It's very bizarre. They go on to say, and side effects are minimal, a dry mouth, and more frequent bathroom trips.
Yeah, you got a lot of vitamin C to fucking get rid of.
Yeah.
Christ.
The article explains that apparently vitamin C is absorbed by cells where it breaks down into hydrogen peroxide, which is capable of damaging body tissue. Which in the beginning seems like a fairly simple claim, but it's actually fairly more complicated than that. There are recent reports that ascorbic acid, vitamin C, can increase the levels of hydrogen peroxide in cells, but exactly how that works is unclear, and it is far less simple than hydrogen peroxide being a breakdown product of the vitamin. But let's say they knew that and they just simplified the situation. What does the article actually say about the study? So they said the US researchers injected very large amounts of vitamin C directly into the bloodstream of brain cancer sufferers. The 11 patients were given 3 high-dose infusions each week for 2 months, followed by a further 2 per week for 7 months. Subsequent tests showed that iron in their tumours reacted with the vitamin to form highly reactive and destructive hydrogen peroxide molecules. The hydrogen peroxide caused selective DNA damage to cancerous cells while leaving healthy cells unharmed, they claim. The cancer cells then died off at a greater rate or became more sensitive to radiation treatment and chemotherapy drugs. The article goes on to quote one of the authors of the study, Dr. Gary Buettner, who said, "This paper reveals a metabolic frailty in cancer cells that allows us to utilise existing compounds like vitamin C to sensitise cancer cells to radiation and chemotherapy. We demonstrate that cancer cells are much less efficient in removing hydrogen peroxide than normal cells, thus cancer cells are much more prone to damage and death from a high amount of hydrogen peroxide." So the article claims that vitamin C is going to treat cancer, but obviously it's clear that the bulk of the article is talking about hydrogen peroxide and not vitamin C.
And they're just hoping that the hydrogen peroxide is coming from the vitamin C.
Yeah, and there are studies, including this study, but there is another paper that they referenced in this study that does show that vitamin C leads to increased hydrogen peroxide levels, and they did a load of other experiments to prove that the two are linked. They can't say that one is causing the other, but the two do seem to be linked.
And is that vitamin C as in megadosing vitamin C, or just like upping your dose of vitamin C in your natural diet?
It's pharmacological ascorbic acid, and it's used in cell lines, so it's not in...
It's not in people at that point, so they're not sure if ingesting vitamin C or
will
jabbing it directly into you. Yeah.
There are some studies that look at blood levels of vitamin C after people have ingested vitamin C capsules, for example. There are some criticisms of some of those studies, but I can't remember which group have done it. The NIH have done some big studies on that, looking at how much is in the blood, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's getting into cells either.
Yeah.
The article does quote someone from Cancer Research UK for some sense of balance, saying, "Cancer experts in the UK say more research is needed. Anna Perman, Cancer Research UK Senior Science Information Manager, warned some doctors think that antioxidants like vitamin C might interfere with chemotherapy, which we know can be effective treatment." So I had a look at the article itself to see if the newspaper article accurately represents what it reports, and I was kind of surprised to see that it does, sort of. Nothing the newspaper article actually says, apart from the oversimplification about vitamin C and hydrogen peroxide, is technically inaccurate, but the way it's structured tells a completely different story to the paper itself. So the paper is titled, "Superoxide and Hydrogen Peroxide Mediated Disruption of Iron Metabolism Causes the Differential Susceptibility of Non-Small Cell Lung Cancer and Glioblastoma Multiforme Cancer Cells to Pharmacological Ascorbate."
Catchy.
Great title, right? So glioblastoma multiforme is brain cancer. Non-small cell lung cancer is lung cancer, obviously. And they're looking at the relationship between hydrogen peroxide, iron metabolism, and treatment with ascorbate or ascorbic acid or vitamin C. And really, the bulk of this study was looking at cancer cell lines in the laboratory. The authors have done some interesting work looking at treatment with ascorbic acid and chemotherapeutic agents in different types of cancer cells. And we do know that vitamin C does induce reactive oxygen species, and we do know that hydrogen peroxide treatment can sensitize cells to death from other treatments. In fact, this is something I've actually done in my own work. I treated lung cancer cells, non-small cell lung cancer cells, with a form of hydrogen peroxide and saw that cells were more likely to die when a particular protein was removed compared to the cells that weren't treated with the hydrogen peroxide. it doesn't equate to clinical use. It's interesting, but it's not clinical use.
Yeah, so there's a long way from a petri dish to in vivo.
Yes, and just because one thing sensitizes cells to death, it doesn't mean that it's useful in patients. It might be that the thing that is sensitizing cells to death is really dangerous for patients.
Yeah.
Or may have other knock-on effects that is going to promote cancer growth. But the study did go a step further. In this case, they looked at the safety of treating patients with high doses of vitamin C. And this is an important distinction. They're not looking at what treatment necessarily does. They're looking at whether it's safe to do.
Yeah.
The study used 11 patients with glioblastoma, a type of brain cancer, and they say in their results section that although the small number of subjects prevent a statistically significant assessment of efficacy, average progression-free survival currently stands at 13.3 months, median 9.4 months, versus the historical median progression-free survival of 7 months. So the authors are saying that there is a 2.4 prolonged progression-free survival median in these 11 patients. But they're comparing it to what they call an historical median, which is to say they're comparing it to the data in the literature.
Yes.
There is no blinded control
Right,
within their own
yeah.
experiments. They're only looking at patients who've got glioblastoma.
Yeah, and how far back in the literature do they go on that one as well? Because, of course, the older the paper is, the poorer the survival rate is probably going to be because we were shitter at treating cancer in the past.
They referenced one paper.
Right, okay.
Which is fine because the point in what they were doing was to see if it was safe and to see if it's worth further investigating.
Right, this wasn't a
It
definitive,
wasn't a
this
clinical
proves that
trial.
it works.
Exactly.
Gotcha, yeah.
And they say this isn't what it proves.
Although it's frustrating that they've put that line in there at all when they've said, even though we've got not enough statistical power to claim this, we do have a better mean survival.
And there's
median survival,
a
rather.
number of problems that contribute to one greater problem, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And one of those problems is the scientists need funding. In order to get funding, they need to prove that their work has clinical significance, that it can be used in patients. And in order to do that, they need to publish papers that show that there is some clinical relevance. And so they're going to slightly overstate it or be a bit more strong on it than they ought to be because they need to get that funding. And that's a quirk of how science works. It's a quirk of how authors writing papers write their papers. It's lots and lots of things culminating in one problem. It's impossible to say that this treatment has had any effect whatsoever on patient survival, that none of their data can say that at all. Basically, we have an interesting study showing an effect in the laboratory, which has been extended slightly to assess the safety but not efficacy in patients. The authors want to express the potential use in patients because that's how they get their funding. And the problem here is that the media article then flips the study around and talks about the patient use in quite strong terms without technically incorrectly explaining the study. The result is a misleading article which suggests vitamin C megadosing might be helpful for patients, which is especially dangerous in the current climate where pseudoscientists might use the article and others like it to convince patients of the legitimacy of their vitamin C treatments, whilst also promoting the distrust of medical professionals and in some cases directly suggesting that chemotherapy is ineffective, whereas this paper was showing that it is better to combine chemotherapy, certainly in cell lines, it is better to combine chemotherapy with the treatment with vitamin C.
Yeah, I mean, I bet hard money that when that article's passed around on Facebook, it's by people saying, you see, vitamin C cures cancer, stop your chemotherapy right now, this is the thing, this is the way forward, this is what Big Pharma don't want you to know.
Absolutely. Yet neither the authors nor the newspaper journalists are likely to see the potential consequences of this reporting on patients, at least until the damage is already done.
So we had a listener question in. We had a question in from Jeff. That's not QED Jeff.
Different Jeff.
This is a different Jeff.
There's more than one Jeff in the world.
There is more than one Jeff in the world.
It turns out.
This is the third Jeff that I know, apparently.
I had an Uncle Jeff.
4 Jeffs that I know about now. I mean, there's 2 Michaels on this fucking show.
That's
Never
true.
mind, Jeffs flapping
We're
about
swamped
all over.
by Jeffs.
But this Jeff is an associate professor of psychology, and so I've got good reason to believe that he knows what he's talking about. And what he thinks is that I don't.
Yes, so he thinks you're full of shit.
So that's interesting. Okay.
So that's the context for this question.
So Jeff wrote in. He said, "Dear Mike Marsh and Alice, I'm writing because I've been a little confused by the point of Mike's crusade regarding the placebo effect, and in particular his stance that seems to conclude there is no placebo effect. To the extent that Mike's argument is that we should be dubious about the claims that the power of the mind can be used to cure cancer, for example, I'm in complete agreement. However, I frequently get the sense that Mike is arguing that there is no placebo effect, full stop. When he concludes it is all just biased reporting, it seems he is suggesting that we should stop using the term placebo effect. So if the argument is there is no placebo effect, it's just telling people that, with regards to the Montgomery and Kirsch paper that I discussed last episode, there is no placebo effect. It's just telling people that they are receiving an analgesic biases their reports towards a lower endorsement of pain. I think the scientific response would be no shit. That's what's called the placebo effect. Thus, this piece of Mike's agenda comes across as a poorly informed semantic argument. If he doesn't want to call this a placebo effect, what would he prefer to call it? Insisting we call it nothing more than biased reporting hinders communication. If this is based on a misunderstanding of Mike's argument on my point, I apologise. If not, I would blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Well, we kind of got into a back and forth with Jeff, because I saw that kind of, you went back and forth a couple of times while you were working, and I sort of like put a thing. And first I'd like to say, good question from Jeff.
Awesome question from Jeff.
And the conversation we were having was, although it was pretty robust, it was very polite. You know, we were very happy to have received this.
Cordial. I like Jeff.
It was very cordial. It was good. So, Mike, this feels like a question for you. So what's your thoughts on this? I've got a kind of a few thoughts about what I think about placebo generally and what we're talking about, but I'd like to hear what you think first. Obviously, you've done a lot more reading on this than I have.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's misunderstanding my argument, really, and to an extent, what I'm arguing is a semantic argument, is that I'm saying the term placebo effect is unhelpful, because, I mean, it depends really on what we're talking about when we talk about a placebo effect. Jeff mentions in his article, he says telling people they're receiving an analgesic biases their report towards a lower endorsement of pain. No shit, that's what we call a placebo effect. And that, yes, that is a placebo effect. But there are also many other effects that are called placebo effects.
Yeah.
And which is why when I talk about placebo on the show, I mention that my definition of placebo, which I think is the most useful definition of placebo, is effect seen in placebo wings of clinical trials. Yeah. And there are lots of things that are included in the effect seen.
Yeah, it's like a cluster of effects. Yeah.
In clinical trials. And once we subtract known effects, like regression to the mean, like natural course of the disease, like biased reporting, is there any, what Ed Zarderns once described as the true placebo effect, is there actually anything left once we've subtracted all of the known effects?
Yeah.
And my argument is no, there isn't, and that's why I say there is no placebo effect, because I'm thinking in terms of the true placebo effects minus all the stuff that we already know about. So I would say, when I'm saying it's all just biased reporting, I'm not saying the entirety of the placebo effect is biased reporting, it's just what's left on that chart. Once we've subtracted statistical effects, once we've subtracted bias from the clinician, once we've subtracted natural course of the disease, what's left on that chart is quite often just biased reporting. That is a placebo effect. If you can manipulate the expectations of the patient into them reporting that they're in less pain, for example, then that's a placebo effect. I would argue that is not a real effect when you're doing that, because the patient may or may not actually be in any less pain. They're just telling you they are in less pain. That effect might exist only on paper and not actually be an effect that exists in the patient at all. It might exist in the patient as well, but it
could be that they feel better, or it could be that they think you want to hear that they feel better.
Yes, and we can't really tell the difference.
To throw an analogy on it, it's like saying if someone's around your house and you ask them, are they cold, should you put the central heating on? If you'd have said first, I'm completely penniless at the moment, I can barely afford to eat. Oh, sorry, are you cold? Should I put the central heating on? They're much less likely to say, yes, I'm cold, because they're going to think, actually, the stuff you've told me is going to influence my response here. I'm as cold as I was, but I'm less likely to tell you accurately how cold I am because of what you've told me ahead of time. That puts in the context what I'm experiencing. Yeah. So is the patient, when they report they're in less pain, are they in less pain? If they are, that might be something to it. If they're just reporting their own less pain because of the various biases that you've set up accidentally or on purpose in the construction of the experiment, put people in a position where they are less likely to tell you they're in pain when they're not, or vice versa, that's not affecting how much pain they might actually be in.
And as I talked about on the show last episode, even if it does affect the amount of pain that they think they're in, pain is a peculiar thing because it has this large psychological component as well, which means you might be modifying that psychological component without actually modifying the raw pain response. And in that case, is the patient in less pain? They're having the same pain signal, but they think they're in less pain. Maybe they are in less pain. Maybe they just think they are because they're misremembering how much pain they used to be. It's a very complicated, murky area, and we don't really know anything about that.
There was another point that Jeff made in there as well about how if you're saying that biasing the patient to think that they're going to end up in less pain will mean that they report in less pain. If you're saying that's what the placebo effect is, no shit, Sherlock, that's what we call placebo. That's what Jeff might call placebo.
That's what a lot of other scientists will call placebo.
Exactly, yeah. But when I talk to people, even skeptics, and give a talk about homeopathy, there are people saying, well, we should allow homeopathy to be given out because placebo effect is very, very powerful. We know that people get better due to placebo. We know that there are clinical effects of using a placebo, so it's perfectly fine to use a placebo because that's what they call the placebo effect.
Yeah.
So if your argument is we need to be much more careful about our use of terminology, which I guess you're both arguing, but from a different perspective, then I'd agree.
Yeah.
If so, we need to come up with a different word for the big cluster, placebo, because it's different from the scientific definition of it.
That's the problem I read. I've only skim-read the discussions that you've been having. But the thing that I saw was that it seems like Jeff underestimates the problem in the lay community, which is exactly why I've said before, and will say again, you should write a book, because academics know what the placebo effect is. No, it's not that strong. No, it's just a clinical effect, and that it's useful for constructing clinical trials, but it's not a way to make people better. Lay people genuinely think it is mind over matter. It's going to make it does all these wonderful things and cures all of these problems, and it's a misunderstanding of the placebo effect. And by educating people better and dissecting the semantics a little bit more carefully and having those discussions, you can help people to grasp that concept a little bit better.
And elsewhere in Jeff's email, because I didn't read the whole email because it was long and there were several backs and forth, so I've just given a flavour of what Jeff was talking about. But elsewhere in Jeff's email, he says, if you're talking about this mind over matter shit, well, I'm completely behind you. And for the most part, that's what I'm talking about. What I'm interested in is picking apart the components of those placebo effects that we observe and seeing what accounts for those things and pointing out that none of that is just the patient's expectations modifies their actual physical condition. That you have taken 4 sugar pills doesn't actually make your gastric ulcers heal faster. It might affect pain because pain's a special case because it's got a large psychological component. But in terms of actually affecting your biology... aside from stuff that we know about, like, if you're worried, your heart might race, and if you're, if someone's nice to you, you'll have a dopamine response and things like that. Aside from, again, known effects like that, there doesn't seem to be a physiological effect from the placebo effect. And that's backed up by the Cochrane collaborations, or they're just called Cochrane now, apparently.
Oh, really?
That's their view on the placebo effect as well, is that there is no objective placebo effect, and what subjective effect there is difficult to distinguish from biased reporting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just flicking through Twitter there, having looked for the word placebo effect to see how the public talk about placebo effect. And it's clear it's people saying things like, I'm not sure if these vitamins really are going to improve my immune system, but at least I'll get a placebo effect. That is not what a clinical researcher would expect when they're talking about placebo effect. That's not the way they'd use the term. People think there will be a physiological effect on them, a physiological benefit from taking something that's inert because they think they'll get a placebo effect. That's not what's there.
The problem is we don't talk about it enough because academics and clinical researchers will say, well, yeah, but it's obvious. I don't need to talk about it because it's obvious. I've got more important things to talk about. But that's misunderstanding how it's interpreted in the wider world.
So when I'm saying the placebo effect doesn't exist, I don't mean that there is not an effect there that we have to account for in terms of regression to the mean, in terms of people's expectations modifying the way they report their condition. I'm not saying that those effects don't exist. I'm saying they're not clinically relevant. They're not clinically useful. They're things that we need to measure in order to subtract them from the purposes of clinical trials. But it's not something we should be relying on as an intervention, which a huge number of even skeptics say, well, if it's a placebo effect, we know placebo effect is very powerful, because that's what we're told, is that the placebo effect is very powerful. Another interesting point on that was naxolone. So there's been research which shows that a placebo effect can be blocked by administering naxolone. And naxolone is an opioid blocker. And so they thought, all right, okay, so is the placebo effect the result of the systemic endogenous opioids being released, which gives you this placebo effect? And if we give you naxolone, that blocks those opioids, which means you don't respond to placebo anymore. And there we go. Isn't that a special magic thing? Which is great. Except the paper that I talked about last episode, Montgomery and Kirsch, when they gave people topical anesthetic and then put both their hands in a vice, one with anesthetic on and one wasn't, and the patient didn't report reported a difference in the pain in their hands, that's obviously not a systemic effect, because otherwise their hands would have felt the same amount of pain relief.
Because you got that much in the system. Yeah.
So that would indicate that it's not a release of endogenous opioids. Or maybe the placebo effect is different things in different circumstances, and we're using the same label to name all of them, which then gets confusing from a science communication point of view, and it means that Jeff and I are sitting there back and forth in an email completely talking past each other when he means one thing by placebo effect and I mean another. So I think for the purpose, the placebo effect, in terms of the name of it, it's something that we should be talking about in terms of clinical trials, but it's because it is the effect of the placebo wing, the totality of the effect observed in the placebo wing. But outside of the context of clinical trials, we should probably be talking about the individual effects that comprise the placebo effect, the biases, the statistical errors, the natural course of the disease. Those are the things that we should be talking about from a science communication point of view, because talking about the placebo effect in the aggregate is really confusing people.
Yes, it is.
Who think that the placebo effect is some sort of like magic thing. So that's what I reckon on that.
Good.
And I hope that addresses your question, Jeff. And almost certainly he's going to email me back and say, well, Mike.
Here's why that answer's full of shit, which is fine. That's very welcome.
I really, really appreciate the question, Jeff. And I promise I'll email you back on it as well, because
if nothing else,
back and forth for a bit, and then I ran out of time.
If nothing else, getting question and that kind of stuff helps you panel beat the dents out of your own argument to a point where you're able to understand how to communicate what you're trying to say and make those points more succinct and clear.
And Jeff also, he made the point that he says effectively an effect by any other name would smell as sweet. Effectively, if you change the name of the placebo effect, you don't solve the problem. But I really think you do, because the word placebo effect has got a load of baggage with it.
Yes, yeah.
And if we can ditch that baggage, that really helps from a science communication point of view. As I say, I think Edzard Ernst referred to it as the true placebo effect. Once you subtract all the known effects, is there anything left? He referred to that as a true placebo effect. Jean Bissonnet referred to it as a contextual effect, so we should refer to it as the contextual effect, this little bit of placebo that's left once you subtract all the known biases. I think the contextual effect is zero. Yeah. Or the true placebo effect is zero. I think the biases that we know about, we measure, classical conditioning, things like that, can account for all of the things that we've seen in clinical trials. I might be wrong. And certainly when we're doing things like Daniel Moorman is doing, where he compares one placebo to another, that's a completely useless comparison. And the literature's got several studies of that nature in. It's a useless comparison, because you're just comparing the biases of the patients and clinicians in this trial to the bias of the... Sure, that regression to the mean will probably cancel out between the two of them, and the natural course of the disease will probably cancel out between the... But the biases won't.
Yes, yeah.
The biases of these guys versus the biases of those guys. Well, that's a useless comparison to anyone. Who gives us stuff?
Okay, so that was one of the questions. I just want to cover another question that we had in, which is from Tim Reed, who's a regular sort of writer to us and things. That name comes up an awful lot. He said, "Hi, SWAC folks. I want to ask if you would like to do a segment on the show soon about the Charity Commission review on CAM. I've been drafting an email reply from the consultation, and as always, feel my answers are going in circles. They seem to say we're not in the business of looking at evidence, but have these criteria for good evidence which seem reasonable, and how can they avoid judging based on the evidence?" He said, "I'm struggling to find ways to suggest they employ experts and consult with the scientific community to get a sense of the consensus on any given treatment. I reckon a SWAC discussion of the issue would really help me write something better," and he sends over his draft too. To see how he's getting on. So, Tim, we thought we'd kind of have a quick chat about the Charity Commission. So, for anyone who wasn't, who can't remember, was it last episode or the episode before that?
I think it was a couple of episodes ago now, but yeah.
Yeah, so the Charity Commission has opened their review on CAM therapies, on how they should deal with charities that exist solely for the promotion of CAM therapies. This was as a result of the legal case that we brought against, or the legal challenge Good Thinking brought against him at the end of last year. And so this consultation is now open until the 19th of May, which is your birthday, isn't it, Mike?
No.
No. Is it not yours, 21st of May? Damn it, 21st of May.
Every time, Marsh.
Good God, I was
Every
so
time.
close. I was so close.
No, it's not the 21st.
20th?
No.
Oh, God, this is terrible. Is it none of them?
See,
it's a 13th. Fucking hell.
No, it's not. Alice has known me about like half the time that you've known me, and yet she knows my birthday and you don't.
I thought it was one of those. It's May.
It is May.
It is May.
I thought it was exactly a month after one of our other friends.
The 12th.
Is it the 12th? Oh.
12th.
Well, that's kind of taken the wind out of my sails. So the deadline for submissions is the 19th of May, which is 1 week after Mike's birthday.
After my birthday, that is.
Good God. So yeah, and what we're encouraging as many people as possible to send in their submissions about what how the Charity Commission should deal with these charities, because we know for a fact that What Doctors Don't Tell You are encouraging their readers to send stuff in. This isn't even just about homeopathy. This is about all charities that might promote anything that is complementary and alternative, i.e. the stuff that's not based in good evidence. So it's how the Charity Commission put their rules in place regarding how they deal with that, how they interpret the law regarding those charities. This could be very, very big. We know there'll be a lot of opposition from people who think that people should be allowed to set up charities that promote nonsense. So it's even more important that people respond to this consultation than it was with the Liverpool or the World Homeopathy ones. This is really, really important if people can do that. And so the Commission are asking several different questions. Now, it's worth saying that if when you submit, you don't want to answer these questions, but you just want to send something short in that say, I believe that the Charity Commission should follow scientific consensus on evidence, and nobody should be allowed to promote therapy that hasn't got good evidence, and that evidence is good scientific, randomized controlled trials, well reviewed, that type of stuff. Just sending something like that in would be fine if that's all you've got the time to do. If it's a choice between doing it or not, that short thing is better. The more time you can put into it, the better, obviously. And the more you can address their 5 kind of key questions, the better. But if you can't address them, don't worry about that. Just send something in anyway. But their 5 key questions are, and I thought we could chat about these now. Question 1, what level and nature of evidence should the Commission require to establish the beneficial impact of CAM therapies? Do you guys have any views on that? What level and nature of evidence should the Commission require?
See, that's a difficult question, because what you don't want to do necessarily is exclude upcoming treatments that you've got a charity established to promote a treatment that is promising, but it's not quite past the evidence bar yet. And you don't necessarily want to exclude those kind of innovative treatments that are working their way up. But what you do want to do is exclude stuff that has been thoroughly studied or has no plausibility, and you want to rule those kind of things out. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, if the NHS doesn't offer it, and no, you can't promote it as a charity or something very cut and dry like that. It's not as simple as doing it like that, I don't think.
Well, I think that's the case. And I think, for me, it's about whether there is good, reliable evidence of effectiveness. If there is already good, reliable evidence of effectiveness, that's good. If there is a therapy that is likely to work, but there isn't good evidence yet, but it's likely because it's got a biological plausibility, or the therapy works in animal models but hasn't quite made the transition to humans yet, but there's a good reliability in animal models.
Yeah.
Those type of things are good. But basically, the more unlikely and the more implausible a therapy, the higher the standard of evidence has to be.
Yes.
So when it comes to Reiki, that relies on the idea that there are these energy fields around us that some people can interpret, detect, and manipulate. That's hugely biologically implausible. Those energy fields have never been observed, and the evidence says it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's enough to say Reiki should not be a charitable benefit. It's not in the public benefit to promote as a charity.
And I think that's a very important distinction to make as well. It's the difference between evidence-based medicine and science-based medicine is that the evidence bar shifts in line with the implausibility of the therapy.
Yeah.
It's which evidence-based medicine kind of argues in a vacuum, and it's like, okay, if we were starting with zero knowledge and we measure this therapy, oh yes, it looks like it works. It's like, yeah, but we're not starting in a vacuum, and actually that therapy working would contradict half of known physics.
Yeah.
So it's more likely actually that the study is flawed and we need to do a better one than it is that actually we've just contradicted half of known physics.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Going on that the thing of let's say there isn't good evidence for this intervention in kids, but there's great evidence for that intervention's use in adults. The likelihood that it will transfer to children is high enough that the absence of a huge wealth of medical literature proving that it's useful in children isn't enough to stop it. But if there's no evidence that it works in anybody, then it shouldn't be effective. There's no biological plausibility. It shouldn't be allowed as a charity. And this question as well, can the benefit of the use or promotion of CAM therapies be established by general acceptance or recognition without the need for further evidence of beneficial impact? If so, what level of recognition and by whom should the Commission consider as evidence?
No.
I'd say no, it can't be. No. It needs to be something that has robust evidence, or something that could plausibly produce robust evidence.
Yeah.
Not... well, it's been used for thousands of years, or it's accepted by this professional standards body or that professional standards body. All these Olympic athletes use kinesio tape, so no.
That's exactly where we are. I mean, acceptance and recognition by the public isn't sufficient to accept that a therapy is effective, partly because you can find support for all sorts of beliefs. Yeah. You can look online and find people who believe that in the Mandela effect and that when they grew up, Nelson Mandela died in prison. That doesn't mean that that you should be able to state definitively that that actually happened, because we know it didn't. So the other point that's really important is that acceptance by practitioners of a therapy is also not acceptable evidence. So, and this is one of the things that comes up with the General Chiropractic Council or the General Osteopathic Council. When it comes down to whether chiropractic can help with a certain condition, they will turn to experts to find out whether that's true or not. And those experts are chiropractors who inevitably will say, well, it can, because I'm a chiropractor. So the practitioners themselves are working from a prior assumption that their practice is effective. Hugh Nielsen believes homeopathy is effective. He's not a good judge of whether homeopathy is effective objectively. Whereas people like NICE, NHS Choices, Cochrane Collaboration, people like that are good independent sources whose acceptance of a therapy is typically based on sound evidence. So going for that evidence first and looking at the people who follow that evidence is a good way of understanding what's useful, really. How should the Commission consider conflicting or inconsistent evidence of beneficial impact regarding CAM therapies?
Depends on the... it's a tricky one. It depends on how deeply they want to get into the evidence. If there's conflicting evidence, then some of it's going to be better quality than others, and you should be paying attention to the good quality evidence. That means they're going to have to get into the business of judging the quality of evidence, but maybe that they can be relying on the scientific community to help them out with that. So they could be talking to the scientific community and talk to people who don't know what they're talking about and say, well, we've got two studies here that one says Reiki works and one says it doesn't. And the scientific community can say, yeah, but that one's garbage because it's done on 4 people. And the ethics committee was a dog or something like,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Question 4: how, if at all, should the Commission's approach be different in respect of CAM organisations which only use or promote therapies which are complementary rather than alternative to conventional treatments? So, what if they're not saying this is an alternative? What if they're saying this is complementary?
It doesn't matter. It depends on really does it work or not. Like what Alice was talking about today. Effectively, they're saying that vitamin C is complementary to the chemotherapy. It would work in conjunction with standard treatment and improve the standard treatment. Or quite often they'll argue that homeopathy, when they're not saying it cures cancer, what they'll say is, but it helps with the symptoms of chemotherapy.
Exactly.
Doesn't fucking matter. It matters, does it work or not? If it genuinely helps with the symptoms of chemotherapy, free to go. If it doesn't genuinely help, I don't think there's a difference between complementary and alternative. Complementary medicine is a euphemism for alternative medicine to get it past regulators. Yeah. That's what the term was fucking invented for.
Yeah, I agree. So from my side, charitable status shouldn't be given to organisations that promote a therapy as an alternative to real treatments. If it says it's an alternative, it is not. It can't be a charity in my eyes. Charitable status shouldn't be given to organisations that promote a therapy as complementary in order to influence patients to choose the therapy instead of real treatments. And we see that. We see the term complementary being used as a wedge to say, well, we're just here to talk about it being supportive alongside real treatments. But when the patient is in the room with the practitioner, how often are they told, well, you can use chemotherapy as well, but actually it's poison and this stuff is just as good. So you do see it being used as a wedge, and that should not be allowed. Charitable status shouldn't be given to organisations that promote a therapy as complementary when there's no evidence it offers any benefit to the patient.
Yes.
And the thing is that what we'd like to point out as well is that conventional medicine is often complementary. You think about cancer, doctors might recommend a range of approaches. They might say they might perform surgery and then prescribe follow-up drugs, and then they might offer the patient physiotherapy, they might offer them counselling. There's lots of different things that can be done for different things. So complementary itself isn't a bad thing, but each different strand of that has to not be bullshit. It has to be good evidence that one of those strands actually works.
It's also the case that you get a lot of CAM practitioners will they treat conventional medicine as just drugs. It's pharmacology or it's nothing at all.
They'll argue that advice to exercise and dietary advice is complementary.
Diet and exercise, exactly where I was going with that, is they think, well, diet and exercise is a complementary. It's really not. Diet and exercise is mainstream, a mainstream medical intervention for all sorts of conditions, diet and exercise. You don't get to claim those as complementary.
Yeah, there is a reason why your doctor asks you how many units of alcohol you drink per week and whether you smoke. It's not because they want to prescribe you a drug for either of those things, because they want to understand what's going on with the rest of your health and see how that would have an effect.
My doctor thinks I'm lying. So they're going, how many alcohol, how many units? Zero. How much do you smoke? Zero.
Well, I heard.
Do they think I'm lying?
I heard Tom from Cognitive Dissonance talk about this because they asked him how much he drinks, and he told them, and it worked out as being like on average 2 drinks a night, so it might be 4 drinks one night and on the next night. And then they were like, okay, do you ever find that you haven't made it to work because of your drinking? Do you ever find that you you're missing important things because of the drinking? Do you ever find that? And it was like, whoa. I drink like 2 drinks a night most. Like, but our advice is that the number that you give us, we treble. So it's like, right. So you thought I was like this complete lush who's drinking like 6 pints a night every single night, and it was just because he'd been totally honest and they weren't prepared for that.
In which case, it's fine because they trebled zero. I'm still not drinking anything.
You're still absolutely fine.
It's not a problem. It's not a problem at all.
Specialists will also often ask you a whole host of other things like, what do you do for a living? Like, I've had specialists ask me what I'm studying at university, and they're writing it down. It's not just out of interest. It's they're trying to build up a picture
of who you are and what you're about.
Exactly, and see if there's any other things that might be affecting your symptoms or conditions.
What other points do I have here? One of the points I had, going back to a previous point, is if the overwhelming weight of evidence is in favour of a therapy, and if it is biologically plausible, it can be considered to be effective and potentially worth promotion by a charity. But if there's evidence against it, or even if the evidence is balanced, if there's studies on both sides, it's still probably unethical to promote that therapy until you're at a point where the evidence is no longer balanced and is very clearly in favour of it. And that's particularly true if there are cost implications to the therapy, or if it has side effects, or if there are other treatments for the condition that are known to work. So if you're saying, well, this therapy, the evidence goes both ways on it, but it's to treat this condition that we've got this other treatment for that actually works, it's unethical to promote the one that's balanced because you've got this other thing over here that actually works. What other question you have? Is it appropriate to require a lesser degree of evidence of beneficial impact for CAM therapies which are claimed to relieve symptoms rather than cure or diagnose conditions?
No.
Why?
Well, again, it works or it doesn't. Yeah. If it's we cure cancer, right? Evidence or shut the fuck up.
Yeah,
it's like we help with the symptoms of chemotherapy. Great, evidence or shut the fuck up. Yeah. It doesn't make a difference one way or the other.
It doesn't matter what it's treating. They need to say what it is treating and what the evidence for that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. If an organisation is promoting a treatment that doesn't work, even for just the treatment of symptoms, it's not worthy of a charitable status. Without evidence of effectiveness, there is no reason to believe that a therapy will be effective for treating symptoms. You need that evidence.
Yeah.
There's a couple of the points I'd want to make too. So there might be some alternative therapies that have been proven to be effective, and those might be appropriate for promotion by a charity, but only if they're able to demonstrate reliable evidence of treatment. It's not an ideological attack on the acronym CAM or the words alternative or complementary. It's just a defense of evidence of benefit to the patient being required before there's any public benefit. So you have to show that you can actually do the thing that you think you can, you say you can do, before you're allowed to be a charity promoter. It. So those are the kind of points that we kind of are making with Good Thinking, and I hope maybe that kind of discussion has helped other people who are filling their submission in. As I say, it's really important that you fill that in. There's details up on our website how to do that. And also, I'm writing a blog for the Good Thinking Society site, which should be up at some point soon, which will kind of encourage people to do this too. You've got until May the 19th. Writing something is better than writing nothing. Answering those 5 questions is a bit better than writing just something. But if we get a good, strong showing from Skeptics on this, it will have a huge effect, not just in homeopathy charities, but in charities that will be registered in the future, in charities that are already registered. This is huge and very wide-ranging and is a real opportunity for a good skeptical win.
So, Liverpool Skeptics the Pub is tonight.
At
our regular venue, which is the Vines on Lime Street. It's our April all sorts.
April
allotment.
Assortment.
April O'Neill.
April O'Neill from Trials.
It's a selection of mini talks where we're going to be talking about various different things. I'm going to be talking about the placebo effect.
Yep, good. Alice, you'll be talking.
I'll be talking about cell biology / cancer.
Cell biology and cancer.
Awesome.
I'll be hosting, so I probably won't be talking.
We've had Jason from Merseyside Skeptics has written in to say how much money would it cost for Mike not to talk about the placebo.
I saw that. I thought that was very mean, Jason.
And it's not about the money, Jason.
No.
It's the point. It's at this point. It's some things are more important than money.
Yeah.
And me talking about the placebo effect is one of them. But so that's tonight in the Vines on Lime Street from 7:30 p.m.
Yeah, we've got like 7 or 8 different speakers talking about a range of different interesting stuff.
It's gonna be really cool.
Yeah.
So hopefully that should be a fun night. That'd be good. So if you're in the Liverpool area, you should come along to that. We've got a result on our charity walk vote poll.
Yes.
So our charity walk is going to be in favour of Mersey refugee support.
Yes.
So that's who we're going to be supporting this year, is a refugee support, Mersey refugee support. So that's going to be taking place on June the 11th, and we'll give you plenty of notice of when that's going to happen, because we'll put up a Just Giving page for listeners to be able to donate for our charity walk. As I say, with the money going to Mersey refugee support, and we'd like to thank listeners for taking part in our Brexit close poll.
Yeah,
that's true.
For who we should be voting for. It was literally a 51-40. Nigel Farage wrote in and said, "This is unfinished business by a long way." So aside from that, I think it is all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Cheers.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We have been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.